It is a heavy, heavy toll. I think that, there's a sense of loss, certainly, whenever there is the break in a relationship, and certainly with familial relationships where we have the expectation that we will have lifelong bonds, that I will know
Mm,
you till I die or until you die, or something external will take you away. The idea that we did something in relationship with one another that has
yeah.
taken us away from each other is very painful. Um, we call it ambiguous loss in my field, where there's a sense that it's a loss without closure. When
Mm,
someone has passed away, you make a different type of peace with it, whether it's spiritually. We have our different understandings of what happens to the body and to the spirit when one passes on.
right.
When someone says, I don't want to be in your life anymore, but you know where they live and you know their phone number and you know that they have your grandbaby over there, or
Mm,
you have that sense there's a different type of loss. It's an incredible rejection. I always think that it's one thing for a public to reject you or to discount you or ignore you when they don't know you. It's another thing for someone to have been in a relationship with you and to say, you know what, I choose not
right.
to know you. That hurts. So,
Mm,
yeah, that's what I would say, I guess, just to start us off and warm up the space in terms of initial thoughts around that. Very, very painful. Very, very
yeah.
painful.
Yeah. And for me, it feels like in some ways, and I'm hesitating with how I'm going to say this, so I'm going to ask y'all to give me
Okay.
some grace in how this comes out. But in some ways, it feels like death has a
Mm,
finality to it that
mhm,
estrangement doesn't. And one of the folks featured in this article in The Economist that we were referencing, he talked about
mhm.
the fact that there's all this anguish that comes from the estrangement, but there's that tug of hope that one day it might change.
Yeah.
Like so, it's
Yeah.
it's like death, but not. It's almost like a zombie. Like the
Mhm,
undead
mhm,
relationships in some way. And I feel like at least in a death context, I'm like, no, you
mhm.
in heaven. You good
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
hell,
Yeah.
depending on
Oh
where
no.
I think you've gone.
Okay.
The lack of finality to me, I think, is also
Mhm.
one of the things that troubles people. How does that
Yeah.
play for you?
Well, people want closure. Uh,
Yeah.
and we see them talk about that in romantic relationships. I want closure. They go back and have that last, or try to have that last conversation, or blame an inability to move on with their lives because they're looking for some event or experience, some conversation that will let them know, okay, there's a period at the end of that sentence. Certainly, death is
Mm,
a type of punctuation, a type of period. I think that estrangement, um, as the individual in that article was referencing, it's kind of like a comma. And there is
mm,
that hope. He was a father. And, I think about that from the perspective of being a parent and what it may feel like or mean to know, that there is this sort of, especially for those folks who have been actively raising and in the lives of their children, they don't really see a life or an identity of themselves separate from that child, you know.
wow.
And so their job, since that little person was conceived and conceived of and brought into the world, was to look after them, even when they're a grown person. I'm an adult, midlife, and I have a mother who thinks I'm a baby. And so I think, there's ways in which she still tries to solve my problems, and I think, it's how her love manifests. So there has to be also, I think, that sense of, well, who am I now, and what do I do? As a
Right.
parent, it's a job. As a child, it's an identity. Who am I, and what do I do now with all of this? And I feel like there's just this real big displacement of big feelings, big tasks, and responsibilities and accountabilities that really has no other place in our society really to go. There's no other
Yeah.
place where it makes sense for you to have that much emotion, that much investment. Um, Outside, I would say, of a long-term partnership, marriage type relationship where you're making family with each other.
Mm. That's hard. That's hard,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to those of us who don't really have an identity outside of our
Hmm.
family units, the
Hmm.
ones that we raise, right? And so I'm thinking,
Yes.
I feel like I'm kind of fortunate in this regard. Like I have
Yeah.
my family self, I have my work self, I have my friend self.
Hmm.
My family
Hmm.
self is my biggest self, but there are
Yeah.
many, but I have these other elements that allow me to delve into other facets of
Yeah.
myself as well. I know
Hmm.
many people, we know
Hmm.
some people in common who their
Hmm.
entire identity is
Hmm.
this family unit, not even the aunt, the
Mhm.
the ones, the unit that they came from or the extended family, this
Mhm.
family unit that they co-created with that spouse or
Yes.
that person.
Yes.
And when that falls apart, it's not even just the family unit falling apart, it's also their sense of
Mhm.
self, their sense of space in the world. And that to me has to trigger a whole level of, I almost said psychosis. That's not the word I'm looking for. A whole other level of distress.
Yes. I would
Distress.
say disorientation, right? Because I think
Mm,
what you're saying, you don't want to say something that's too soft or too heavy, but that is completely disorienting. And I feel like in our society, we're a bit too casual with divorce because the divorce rate is as high as it is.
mm,
But that is what's happening. People who have decided to family together, it's a verb, I think, because it's work, to family together, pulling and that apart. We focus on the romantic side of the relationship having gone awry, but they have decided to build family, blood, kin, bonds together. Yes, there are
yeah.
finances attached to that. Yes, there are all sorts of agreements and arrangements, things that I think when they are divorcing and they pull it apart, there are connections and accountabilities that they didn't even realize that they made, but they're implicit inside of other accountabilities and relationships that they've made in the relationship over time. And that's why
Mm,
that is so disorienting. We see a lot of people uh, do have mental health break. Sometimes it can be a psychosis. Actually, some people do. It is as stressful and as disorienting and as distressful as that. But it really is about if we think about the human being, the individual having an integrated identity,
mm,
major shocks to that break with the identity, then break with the integrity of who that human being knows to themselves to be. They start
wow.
to, yeah, break. And so I don't want to liken it to, say, a multiple personality disorder or a dissociation, but they literally do have to dissociate themselves from the ways that they saw themselves to craft a new life in a new direction. That takes time. That takes a lot of
Mm,
healing, and that takes real focus and attention of appreciating that is major. And I so when I talk about divorce and or the breakup of long-term relationships that maybe don't have the marker of legal marriage, it certainly is when you begin to spend life and time with someone and build life and time and create people with someone or build into the life of the people that others have created. I'm a child of a step family. I have a bonus dad who raised, that's my dad. And
mm,
so it's the building and the pouring into someone's life. How do we then make that space and make sense of disconnection and disassociating? It
yeah.
is incredibly painful. It's emotionally painful, but I would argue there's also a part of identity and disintegration,
Mm,
disorientation that is so remarkable for individuals when that
wow.
happens. It's
Wow.
one of the reasons why people don't do it, why they stay even in toxic relationships, if we're honest.